Hello, we are back again with another top 10 video. Last week we did my top 10 series of all time, and today we're doing my top 10 fantasy authors. Now, as you guys know, I'm not the most well-read in fantasy. I still count myself as pretty new to the genre, and there's still many big series that I need to read. But I wanted to do my list today to track down who my favorites are at the moment, so I can see how my favorites change over the years and see how my preferences change. So this list is a little bit cheeky. We've got our top 5 fantasy authors. We've got 3 authors that don't fit into the fantasy category that I love and I've got so much enjoyment from reading. And I've got 2 predictions of who I think will make this list next time round. So starting with my top 3 authors that aren't exactly fantasy, we have Frank Herbert. So at the moment, I've only read Dune, but I really loved how interesting the writing style was for Dune. Dune was one of my first experiences being in the third person, head jumping sort of writing style, where we're sitting at a dinner table with different characters and we're literally from paragraph to paragraph, jumping from one person's head to the next, getting all these different perspectives in one chapter. I'd never had anything like that before and I really enjoyed it, and I just found Frank Herbert was able to introduce me to a whole different way of writing, and I really appreciate that. As I've only read one of his books, I won't drag on too much about his writing, but I really enjoyed it, and if you haven't read Dune yet and you're looking for something different, it's a classic for a reason. You definitely should check it out. Coming in at number 2 on this list, we have John Flanigan. John Flanigan is known for his series The Ranger's Apprentice, and he's the author that got me into reading as a kid. His series are based around his own world, where he's kind of just got this like medieval England, where we've got this Ranger's Corps, where it's basically the Rangers are a group of spies, and we're in a very medieval time period. So these Rangers, these spies, they're very good with bows. They're very much on the outskirts of society, so not many people know too much about them. And they do a really big job keeping their country safe. And as a kid, these books were so enjoyable and so easy to read that it really started my fascination with reading and got me interested into the fantasy genre as a whole. These books don't have too much of a fantasy element, but they have just a touch. So if you're looking at getting someone younger into reading, I highly recommend checking out John Flanagan's work. And my favorite non-fantasy author is Matthew Riley. Matthew Riley was someone who ignited my reading series a little bit after I'd finished reading John Flanagan's books. And what Matthew Riley does is he writes action, and his books are just so enjoyable. Once you start reading them, you just have to keep reading. He writes pretty thick books, but you read them so quickly because he just leaves you wanting more and more. Things are constantly happening and you have to find out what happens next. Action is just such a fun genre to read, and Matthew does it so well. Definitely check out his work if you want to change pace from fantasy. Alright, so now my top 5 fantasy authors. Coming in at number 5, we have a tie. We have Ryan Cahill and Joe Abercrombie. So the reason I couldn't pick one of these over the other is because Joe's work I've only recently discovered. I'm only halfway through The Blade itself at the moment, and I can't say I've read a better book when it comes to characters and just enjoyable writing. There's a lot of similar vibes to George R. R. Martin's writing style, but also Joe's able to make it his own, and you just get this really just dark, gritty feeling with a great sense of humor that just leaves you smiling while you're reading it, while there's some really dark things going on. Joe lives up to all the hype that he's given online, so you should definitely check out his reading. But also, Ryan Cahill is incredible. The only reason he isn't higher up on the list is because he's only got 1 book series out at the moment, and the authors I have ahead of him have multiple works out. Now, Ryan's the only independent author I've got on this list, and it doesn't feel that way when you read his books. His books feel exactly like any other books written by authors on this list. He does classic fantasy with a modern voice. His series, The Bound and the Broken, is really like Eragon if it was written by George R. R. Martin and John Gwynne. He does a great job building a world, building an intriguing plot, putting great characters there, and really keeping your eyes hooked to the page. He does some really interesting things with how he adds novellas to his series to build out his worlds, his characters, and his storylines. And he's done a great job growing as an author from book to book. And he's just a really awesome person overall. And it's really cool how he's been able to build his series up without having a publisher. You should definitely check out The Bound and the Broken if you haven't already. Coming in at number 4, we have Brandon Sanderson. And I can't say I love all of Brandon's work, but the Stormlight Archive is something very, very special. What Brandon has built both in that world with his characters, the world building, The way Brandon plans so far ahead of his plots in all his series, he is able to work magic with his books by leaving clues all the way out through his novels. So his endings are always the most satisfying endings in all of fantasy. His world building, with the way he's done his hard magic systems, is incredible, and he really started a trend there. Brandon has done a great job making fantasy very approachable. His writing style is pretty simple, but it makes it so easy to read his books, and you can fly through his books much quicker than other authors. And outside of the Stormlight Archive, he has many other good books too. Mistborn, The Final Empire, is one of the first books that got me into reading fantasy as an adult. Warbreaker, another great series. What he's done outside of his writing, with building a business and engaging with his fans, is another reason that makes Brandon such a great author. He's able to connect and build communities and just build a thriving group of people that love his books and can get enthusiastic about them. I think what Sanderson has done for the fantasy genre is just incredible, and he's definitely worth checking out. There's so many places you can start with Brandon. Just have a look at his series, see which vibe connects with you, and start there. Coming in at number 3, we have George R.R. Martin. Because I read A Song of Ice and Fire so long ago, I sometimes forget about it. But every time I'm doing a list and I start thinking about George and his writing style, the world he built, the characters he built, and every aspect of A Song of Ice and Fire, and also this TV series he's built and the interviews he's done, he just climbs up my list every single time, because I find Westeros to be the most alive world of any of the fantasy books I've read. When I read A Song of Ice and Fire, I just felt like I was living in that world so much more than any of the other books I've read. The way George does his characters, the way they're cheeky, the way they're dark, gritty, grim, but there's also a sense of humor there and wittiness, is just so enjoyable, and I just loved all his characters and spending time with them. And I really find that just George can just put you in a world better than anyone else, with both the writing style and the world building. And the fact that he got so many people interested in fantasy with the adaptation of Game of Thrones was just impeccable. So George is just a fantasy icon. Coming at number 2, we have J. Kristoff. Now, this will probably be my most controversial author to put on this list. A lot of people don't like J. Kristoff. They think he's too edgy. They think his prose is too purple. They don't like the smut he includes in his books. And they just don't like his humor. I personally don't see any of these things or have any of those issues when I read his books. Maybe that's because I'm from Australia like Jay, and we just have a sense of humor over here that just isn't appreciated in some other countries. He's also into the same types of like music and scene that I'm in, so maybe I just connect with his writing a bit more than other people. He's very much into his screamo music, likes his metal, and he's just on the darker, edgier side. So you may want to watch out for that if you're looking at reading J. Kristoff. But more on J. Kristoff, I find his writing style to be so interesting. He uses so many different words that I don't normally read in books. And what those words do, they really encapsulate the world that Jay is trying to put you in. The type of language that his characters use really sets the scene and the setting that you're in, and it puts you in that other world. You're not just reading a book with modern writing that just takes you out of it or just makes you feel like the world isn't as real setting. He puts you in a book in a world that just feels more real, but in a different way to the way George does it. And I really love the darker, edgier side to his characters. I just find them really enjoyable, and I find his humor really hits for me where it might not for other people. And in just seeing him in interviews, he just seems like a great dude, and I really think you should check out J. Kristoff if anything I've said has resonated with you. Now, making this list of authors was super hard, especially when it came to ranking them, like putting who's number 2, who's 3, who's 4, or how do I put everyone. It was very tough. But when I came to putting number 1, all I had to think was, have I enjoyed every one of this author's books? Have they done multiple series that I've loved? And the answer is yes. John Gwynne was the easy pick for number 1. John Gwynne has released 9 books across 3 series, and I've enjoyed every single one of his books. The weakest of his books, Malice, which was the first book he ever wrote, was still enjoyable. And John does a great job of just picking a few things he does really well and just doing an incredible job of them. With John's books, you know you're going to have a really fun band of characters. They're going to feel like your comrades. They're going to feel like people you want to hang out with. and it's going to be easy to vibe with them. You're also going to get some villains that you're really going to hate, and you're really going to despise them. Then his worlds, they're going to be medieval. There's going to be a lot of swords and axes, and there's going to be a lot of great battles. And his worlds, they're not going to be anything crazy, but they're definitely going to be interesting. We've got a really good medieval Europe with some sick giant in 2 of his series. And then his other series, we get an incredible Norse setting with some real Viking themes and some gods reawakening, which are done in a really cool way. And his writing is just, it's kept simple. It's like Brandon Sanderson's. It's super easy to read. It's super digestible. And you're just going to get the best battles and fight scenes that you kind of come across. The conflicts and the battles in his books are just top notch. He doesn't do too much political drama. He doesn't do like the character work that you would in like an Abercrombie or a George R.R. Martin. But what he does do, he just does so well. It just makes it so enjoyable that there's so many scenes in his books where when you finally take out the bad guy, you just want to cheer because he just gives you that sense of good feeling, and he can just weave the story so well. I've never been disappointed by a John Gwynne book, and if you haven't read any of him yet, I highly recommend that you do. Alright, so we've just done my number 1, and you've noticed I've only talked about 8 authors today. So finishing off this top 10 list, we have 2 authors that I'll be reading this year that I think will be making this list. So one of them is Steven Erikson. From everything I've heard of Malazan, of just how epic and how grand a scope this series is, I think I'm going to fall in love with it. That's one of my predictions. And the other one is Robin Hobb. Now, I've put off reading Robin Hobb for quite a while now because I've heard how good the characters are, but I haven't heard too much else about the series. But I keep hearing so much about her characters, and every time I read a book myself, I find if the characters are good, I can get enjoyment out of it. So I'm going to add Robin Hobb to the list and back her in. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe down below. I've got more of these lists coming. Like the video. Please comment your favorite authors of all time. And thank you so much for watching.